let's get into some football. We'll get into John McMullen's Mock Draft 1.0, which we've been going through starting Friday and now leading up to right now, where we are at pick number 25 with the Philadelphia Eagles, John. And I know we'll dive a little deeper into this one, but at 25, a lot of options on the board, including running back Josh Jacobs, which we talked a little bit about yesterday. You don't think if he's on the board, the Eagles would take him. You see them going defensive tackle Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame, and there's a lot of options there. Why Tillery?
Well, I think, he's at the position on the defensive line that's the deepest in this draft. He's likely to fall. I think if this were a typical year, you're talking about Tillery as maybe a top 15 pick. So I think there's tremendous value. And even this year, if he didn't get hurt in the second half of last season, I think he could have been a top 15 pick. Great locker room guy, good kid, very, very smart by all indications. So to me, he's a tremendous fit for everything, not only on the field but off the field, for what the Eagles want and what they like. And if he's there, I think if you look at Notre Dame as a whole through the Brian Kelly era, guys who stay are generally very, very well prepared for the NFL. So I think there's a lot of check marks if you take a player like that.
Is he better than Trevor Laws, the last defensive tackle that came from Notre Dame?
Yeah, yes, and that's what I'm different regime, different era. But if you look at you look at a Zach Martin, you look at a Quentin Nelson, you look at a Harrison Smith, Mike McGlinchey. All the players that have stayed 4 or 5 years at Notre Dame have generally been really well prepared under Brian Kelly. I'm not a big fan of his as a coach, but you got to give the devil his due. The guys who stick there have generally proven to be, as I said, ready to go.
Some of the other options you had at 25 that you noted in your mock draft was Josh Jacobs, Chris Lindstrom, Jonathan Abram, and Dexter Lawrence. And those are all guys, except for Jacobs, Lindstrom's a guard, that play on the defensive side of the ball. So do you feel that defense is definitively the side they're going to go?
I think it's most likely. We've talked about that a lot. I think offensive line is a potential. I know this team and Jeff Stoutland particularly likes Chris Lindstrom a lot. He's an offensive guard, however. I think they prefer a tackle. And maybe if Ford or Dillard fall a little bit further than expected, they could be in the mix. So I do think offensive line is potential and safety is potential. We've talked about how effective Malcolm Jenkins has been, but he's got not only is he aging, but if you think about how much he plays, never leaving the field, you got to start thinking about life after Malcolm Jenkins. So it might not be a need pick right now, but if you get value at the safety position, I think that could also be involved.
Number 26, Indianapolis, Dexter Lawrence, Clemson. Now, he's a guy that I like. He is more of a run-stuffing guy, though, than your class. No, I don't want to say your class. He's more of your I mean, I look at him more of like an old-school nose than I would a 4-3, D tackle like in today's game.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to extend a first-round pick for two down players. At least that's the thought now in the NFL. So those guys kind of get pushed a little bit down, and maybe certainly in a different era, they would have been more important. I still think there's tremendous value with a guy like Lawrence and players like that in general. I think that's an underrated part of this game because the more impact you put into stopping spread offenses and you want edge rushers and you want athletic linebackers and you want hybrid safeties, the less you can stop the run. I mean, you give and take a little bit when you do that, and you give good run defenders, you take them off the field. And sometimes that's where you see late in the season, the Patriots are the perfect example of that. Last year, they kind of took advantage of that, and smart teams will do that. So if you're going to play that way, you almost need that big run stuffer in the middle to try to do things and make it difficult to run the football, even if they don't have a lot of help around them on the defense.
Let's go to 27, where it's the Oakland Raiders. Mike Mayock is leading them now. He is the guy pulling the trigger. And you believe they will be the team that goes running back with Josh Jacobs. They got the receiver. Now they add a running back.
Yeah, and I think they really like Jacobs from everything I've been hearing from people around the league. So I could see that happening at 24 or 27. They have those two picks relatively close to each other. I know people will get upset if they take them right before the Eagles, but as I said, I don't think the Eagles are taking them either way, so I wouldn't get too upset about that. The Raiders, though, like them. But I will say one thing, Mike Mayock's not calling the shots. John Gruden's calling the shots, but at least John Gruden's got a guy who's been through this process from the media standpoint for a lot of years, and I talked to Mike a lot. Nobody knows the NFL draft better than Mike Mayock.
Yeah, he's a very smart guy. Interested to see which way they go with him. And by the way, did they announce who's replacing him on the NFL Network for draft night?
I'm not sure. I know Daniel Jeremiah has taken over his duties as sort of that lead analyst, so I would assume he would hop into that seat, but I'm not 100% positive of that.
All right, let's get to the Chargers at number 28. This is where Chris Lindstrom, an old school nasty guard, Boston College, and you know, this is a team, the Chargers now, that some people think are a Super Bowl team if they can protect Phillip Rivers, who's getting a little older.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the Chargers are always looking for offensive linemen, whether they're good or bad. And they're obviously coming off a very good season, but they still need help up front. And like I said, Lindstrom's a guy the Eagles really like as well. But you think about what Philadelphia's done and the interior, extending Isaac Seumalo. Brandon Brooks is obviously back, extending Jason Kelsey, but Brooks is coming off the Achilles. So if they would take somebody like Lindstrom, it's for down the road a little bit, and it wouldn't be a bad pick, and it would be sort of my plan B or plan C if some of those defensive linemen continue to go off the board and go a little bit earlier. So he's somebody to put an asterisk by for the Eagles as well. But I don't think he drops past the Chargers.
29 is Andy Reid's Kansas City Chiefs, and they lost an edge guy. You think they need to replace him. Brian Burns, Florida State. Dee Ford's out. Justin Houston gone. So Brian Burns heading to Kansas City.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys, sort of like Ed Oliver. Those are and maybe throw Montez Sweat, because you could see Montez Sweat. I have him going really early in the draft, very similar to Burns, and they could sort of flip-flop. I could see that happening. It sort of depends. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And if you like somebody a little bit better, it could have great ramifications. But either way, we've talked about it constantly. The edge, particularly defensive line as a whole, but edge even more so is the strength of this draft. And when you can get a player like Burns this late in the draft, it tells you how deep this draft is on the defensive line.
Yeah, I know Howie Roseman mentioned it. You've mentioned it here as well. Green Bay. This is a 30th pick. It comes from the Saints. Jonathan Abram, Mississippi State. He's a safety. Green Bay, as we talked a couple of days ago, they've been really trying to retool the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and they should, because I kind of mentioned that earlier when we talked about their first pick. The sexy stuff is to talk about the stuff that just came out with Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy and all the dysfunction on that side of the football. But the issue in Green Bay for years has been the defensive side, and everybody who watches that team kind of understands that. And they have to keep building up on that side of the football. You would think a healthier Aaron Rodgers. Remember, he got injured in week 1 last season, played through a significant injury. You'd think you'd be better from that standpoint, bringing in an offensive-minded head coach. They just need more talent on the defensive side of the football.
I like Abrams, by the way, the safety there. And they got Amos this offseason as well, really retooling over there. The Rams, Jeffrey Simmons, Mississippi State. He's teammates, by the way, with Abram, and another defensive lineman.
Yeah, and there's a guy who could be a top 10 at the beginning of the season, might miss the entire season. But if you think about the Rams and all the talent they have, they're a team that can afford to wait, and they're not going to have Ndamukong Suh anymore. So if you're willing to wait, you could have another dominant defensive lineman to team with Aaron Donald a little bit down the road. And it'll probably end up being great value.
And then we get to the end here. The Patriots, who are very interesting. They've had a meeting today with some guys we'll get into as well. Irv Smith, tight end. They obviously need to replace Gronk. They're looking at Seraphin Jenkins. They're bringing him in today for a workout. But Alabama's tight end, Irv Smith. This is a good tight end class, so this is a good time for Gronk to let them know that, hey, I'm out.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to replace Gronk, and they did sign Austin Seferian-Jenkins today, but that's not going to affect their draft status. That's still not a replacement for Rob Gronkowski. Not that Irv Smith is going to be either, but you do need a bigger threat at that particular position, especially at this stage with Tom Brady. And we always talk about the ageless one and his ability to play so well this late into his career. But there is some, believe it or not, you can't tell by the fact that they got another ring. There are some physical deficiencies. You can't just chuck the ball down the field like some of the younger quarterbacks in this league. So I think tight end is more important for the Patriots than a lot of teams because you do have to play and understand those deficiencies of a 40-plus-year-old quarterback. The big arm's not going to be there any longer. So you need somebody that can be effective in the middle of the field.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned Seferian-Jenkins. He's a receiving tight end guy. He's not he was with the Jets, and he's a guy that they want to catch the ball. They used their tight ends. They had Hernandez. So this was a team that went from using 2 tight ends very prominently to really now needing to fill the void of that position.
Yeah, and that's what's happened. That's what's been so great about that team through this 2-decade run. They've gone through different phases, and as you mentioned, they had the dominant 2 tight end offense before Aaron Hernandez's life went off the rails. And a lot of people have looked at that as the template for maybe the Eagles with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. We'll see how much they go to tight end as we move forward versus 11 personnel and 3 wide receivers. But from the Patriots, I think it's more important for them now to make sure they bolster that tight end position again. You're not going to be able to replace one of the greatest tight ends of all time, but you do have to be aware of it because of where Tom is in his career, and he needs that security blanket in the middle of the field.
Well, they're bringing him in possibly other weapons. T.J. Yeldon visiting today, and Demaryius Thomas, who, looked like he was about out of gas last year, went from Denver to Houston. Houston let him go. He had the bad injury. But the Patriots, they've always been the team that takes shots on these type of guys.
Yeah, and they always seem to do better with these types of players than the teams they come from. And history has proven that as well, time and time again. If they do make more moves, you might look at that, I believe, May 7th date where it doesn't count against compensatory picks. Going to see sort of a second wave of free agency. But they're always doing their due diligence, and everyone should study sort of how the Patriots do business. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, Yeldon was with Jacksonville last year. Demaryius Thomas had the, what did he have, an Achilles injury?
Yeah, late in the season after he got traded to Houston. And obviously they also need help at the wide receiver position as well. So it's, it's rare to say about the Super Bowl champions, but we've been talking about this for years.
Sure.
You get to this point of the year, you're before the draft, and we constantly look at that Patriots roster and say, how are they going to keep this going? And somehow they keep it going.
By the way, the AAF signings have been keeping going. Brandon Silvers, the quarterback from the Memphis Express. Now, he was the guy that kept John. It's John Manziel now, by the way. He kept John Manziel on the bench there. He was part of that one and only overtime game in the AAF, but he's going to the Jets. So these AAF signings continuing.
Yeah, and he was here. He was with the Eagles for a tryout last year, the minicamp tryout, rookie minicamp tryout. So he's a little bit familiar here. And as you mentioned, John, the more mature John Manziel, I assume, he got there late. So that's not necessarily, I think, indicative of anything. But yeah, I mean, the AAF, I think a lot of people are kind of misconstrued. This was always going to happen because the players in the AAF, even if it continued, even if they finished the season, they all had NFL outs in their contracts. So when you have the bloated off-season rosters, the best players, there's 90 roster spots, the best players in the AAF were going to get signed for those off-season rosters.
Well, do you think if the league didn't go away, now maybe at the end of the year, do you think there would have been every year this influx of AAF players signing?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
If they continued, I don't think there's any question, because as long as – and I should put one sort of caveat on that and say if Charlie Ebersol was telling the truth about the contracts and there was an NFL out, we assume that's true, but you can never say anything's true with that league and how it was run. But in theory, yeah, the best players were going to get opportunities in the NFL, and if they got cut, they just signed with the AAF or maybe the XFL the next offseason if they wanted to continue on. But that's, yeah, there's no doubt that the best players were always going to get pilfered by the NFL, and that's what the AAF was building to, from at least Bill Polian's standpoint, in being a developmental league. That's what they wanted to do, and I think they did a good job at that. I think maybe some of these players are better off, and certainly some of the quarterbacks, and we'll see one with Luis Perez here with the Eagles, because I don't think you can get better, particularly at the quarterback position, unless you play.
By the way, Patriots, more news today. Daniel Jones, the quarterback from Duke, who we talked a little bit about yesterday, visiting the Patriots. It wouldn't be a shock to anyone if the Patriots – now, if a QB is there at 30, would that be a shock? 32, I guess you would say.
Well, I think you're going to have 4 going in the first round. And really that 32 slot, if the Patriots want to trade out, and you saw it last year with the Eagles and trading with Baltimore, who took Lamar Jackson. You always have an opportunity to move out of that slot if that last sort of first-round quarterback is hanging there, because people like to get that fifth-year option at the quarterback position, because it becomes very, very cost-effective if you hit on that quarterback and you have the extra year to deal with it as you get with first-round picks. So if somebody slips, those top 4 guys, 32 at the end of the first round is always in play for that last quarterback.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if the Patriots finally. They have drafted a lot of quarterbacks in the past, and none of them have stuck around. If they finally get one, maybe even in the first round, to say, hey, we're going to keep you for at least 3 years in the back out. 2, I don't know. Brady probably plays what, another at least 2?
Well, he says he wants to play to 45, and he's continuously said that, and we all assume at some point it'll happen and the decline will begin. It certainly happened with Peyton Manning. It has to happen at some point. I think Bill Belichick, from his standpoint, it was pretty clear that he was hoping the timing would almost work out and you could have that transition from Brady to Jimmy Garoppolo. Didn't work out. Tom's still playing well. Won another Super Bowl. So I think it's already proven that they were right to deal to Garoppolo. And it's tough. It's tough to make that timing work unless you're willing to wait, like Green Bay did with Aaron Rodgers while Brett Favre was still there.
That whole Aaron Rodgers thing is crazy, by the way.
Yeah. Or you get really lucky when Peyton Manning hurt his neck and missed the season, and they did sort of that so-called suck for Andrew Luck in Indianapolis. That worked out for them. But that's rare. And that Rodgers stuff, there's no surprise. He's got a big ego. I don't think everybody knows that. And Greg Jennings, specifically, and Michael Finley, they've had a lot of criticism to Aaron Rodgers.
Yes.
So none of that is new.
He's John McMullen. You hear him every day at this time. We do football at 4.